Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for the first of our series of talks for Abu Dhabi Art 2016. I wanted to take a moment just to thank Dr. Farjam, who is our partner with the Farjam Foundation and the Farjam Collection for our talks program this year, but who has also made possible the incredible exhibition you will have seen as you came into the auditorium, which is called Arab Presence and explores the presence of Arab artists in Paris from 1908 to 1988. All the works in exhibition are, of course, from the Farjam collection, and it's a great pleasure and honor to be able to exhibit these works here at the fair. I wanted to invite Dr. Farjam just to say a few words of welcome, and we'd like to thank him once again. He'll be able to introduce our distinguished panelists today, whom he's invited to join us. We're deeply honored to have them present with us. So Dr. Farjam, if I can invite you up here for a few words. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, ladies, gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming to this talk today. I hope you'll find it as fascinating as I am fascinated by the artworks that's behind it. In 13th century, early 13th century, the Mongols attacked Iran and they killed 90% of the population. But when they got to Shiraz, which is the town that I come from, they stopped there because the ruler of Shiraz used a diplomacy, and that was a cultural diplomacy. They presented him with all kinds of wonderful cultural assets from Shiraz, and therefore the population was saved. So the Allah and I were talking, and we asked His Highness and His Excellency and Professor Mariët Westermann and Monsieur Rabaté to please join and discuss this cultural diplomacy. I'll leave it with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Farjam, dear friend, great collector, great champion of art, culture, and indeed cultural diplomacy. I'm so pleased that all of you came. Thank you for being with us. I think it's a wonderful idea that Diala and her team had, working with Dr. Farhad, to sponsor these talks. We're very grateful to them. And to start the very first one with this topic that may surprise you if you're coming to the Abu Dhabi Art Fair. Because, of course, the topic of art and of cultural diplomacy may not be as immediately connected as it may seem. So by way of introduction, I'd like to do us all a thought experiment, because all of you are great art enthusiasts, and it means that you can conjure in your minds great works of art without my showing you slides of them. This is really because I wasn't timely enough to produce my slides, but I don't think you need them. So think of the works of art as I will mention them, these works of art. The Great Pyramid of Giza. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. The Great Sculpture of Zeus at Olympia. You're doing pretty well, right? You can kind of conjure them, yeah, right? The Mausoleum at Halicarnassus. For those of you who don't know, that is in Bodrum in Turkey, in the former Persian Empire. But you can't conjure it because it no longer exists. And in fact, most of these works in their original form, other than the Pyramid at Giza, and not quite in its original form, no longer exist. And yet you can conjure them. Why is that? What these four works have in common is that they were widely known in the ancient world, the broad realm of which this part of the world forms part, as belonging to the seven wonders of the world. Herodotus mentioned most of them, the great historiographer, others added on. Anybody in the ancient world had a picture of them, even if they hadn't seen them. That's of course in part because they're extraordinary works of human creativity and culture. They represent entire cultural realms, countries, nations, religions even. But at the same time, they were great works of art. They were great works of artifactual manufacture on great designs. That is what art, of course, is. But that's not all that they were. The reason Herodotus, a historian after all, not an art historian like me, mentions them is that they are also great works of art that were built not just to serve the cult of the dead in Egypt, for example, take care of the afterlife, the temple, the statue of Zeus in Olympia. The reason that they were so important in people's minds' eyes, as in yours, is that they were great projections of state power. Is state power the same as diplomacy? That's a good question to ask, I think. But certainly, if you think now down the line of all the cultures and places you come from, all the museums you've seen, how many works of art in them were actually part of a great political context, a geopolitical context. It doesn't mean that the people who commissioned them, like the Medici, didn't love them. They were great aesthetes, they were great art historians even, perhaps. But they often had additional functions. And that is, I think, what makes having a talk about cultural diplomacy in this great crossroads of the world, that is Abu Dhabi and the UAE, and that has done so much to build a cultural district, museums, an art fair, a culture of collecting, why the topic is so relevant to an art fair that in itself, Abu Dhabi Art, such a great success of a fair, brings together people from far and wide around the world to participate in what is, in a way, a diplomatic gathering, even if that's not why you thought you came. All right, that is my little introduction. We're going to hear from our wonderful panelists. We're going to have a fairly free-flowing conversations. We know each other well. We've talked about these topics for many, many years. So I hope you enjoy it. We're going to go for about 40 minutes. So I'm going to start with you, Your Highness, if I may. So collecting art has been part of your life since you were conscious, it seems. And besides that, you have also supported the making of art by really giving, at one point you created UAE Unlimited, you've created platforms for artists to exhibit, to come together, for curators to be part of it, but also poets, for example. You have a very wide-ranging set of interests. And I wanted to ask you how you think, from this wide experience, about the role of art in diplomacy and the potential, really, of cultural diplomacy as an idea.
Thank you for the introduction, Mariët. I was honestly thinking, how would I actually start up this talk? But I think you kind of gave me a good avenue to start with. Talking about historical monuments from the ancient world, one thing that I used to say, and I couldn't quite figure out how to put it together, which is that anywhere you go in the world, culture exists, but it can be different types. It can be simple, or it can be a very, what's the word that I'm looking for? Is that it can be emulated, that it's loved to the degree that people take the style, they use it, and they adapt because they like what they see. Because you can go to anywhere, and even the basic thing of like making clothes, what you cook, that's all culture if you come and you think about it. And I think that with the Ministry of Culture, they have enshrined and inscribed so many intangible heritage elements. And when you think about it as a concept, it's not that you're looking at a specific art form or a building. It is a way and a mode of thinking and a way of life. So, yes, you have cultures that naturally get copied by others and also adapted. Think of, on a very simple kind of note, the French Art Nouveau movement. And we have some great examples right now in the current exhibition at the Louvre. It was their introduction to Japan and Japanese art. So I think this ebb and flow of style, of living habits, of music, cuisine, and you can just go on and on with it. All of it is there. But I think one of the things that I find personally powerful, and I'm not sure, are the slides available?
We can start the slides with His Highness's. Marwan.
But can we see the other one? Yeah. Is that it's not just about simple things in life. Life sometimes can be hard. Anti-war imagery is a big theme, and it's an important one, and I think especially for this time we're living in. When Goya created this work, it was one of the first examples of, rather than famous battles with successful people, it was the disasters of war. It was about the people who became, the victims became the main element. This is where your attention, your sympathy goes to. The fact that they have faces. You don't see who the aggressors are. Fast forward 200 years, and then Marwan Sahmarani created this. I never noticed until I was actually putting up these slides that I was like, May and summer, so we're definitely within the same kind of season, as they say. And I think that it's important that we all remember and take the time to reflect on what people are showing you and why they show it to you and what's the aim of that image. The funny thing is that when I got this work a few years ago, I once had a guest who came over and he's like, he knew immediately, he's like, definitely referencing Goya. I was like, yeah. And he's like, but you know what's different? Now the aggressor also has a face. And they're both on the same level. They're on the same plane. It is not that somebody is standing out. And you're seeing the flip side. And I think that's why it's such a great work. Because it's not just about, like when we talk about emulating culture, it takes something to influence the way that you are going to be moving forward and what you're going to be creating. It's a very important element.
Thank you so much for that very powerful, I think, poignant and moving introduction to art doing things beyond the individual who may see it carrying a broader message, is what I'm hearing you say. And we've talked about this a little bit in general, about how war can be filtered through art in different ways that are often sometimes unexpected. I wanted to see if I could ask you, Your Highness, if you could reflect with us about what is it about art, rather than, say, a newspaper article or a graph with numerical details, that can help us understand the humanity of others, who is affected. If you would like to speak to that.
If I'm going to be very honest, I think photography might be the most powerful medium and the most effective in this day and age. We're all on social media nowadays. We all have our phones in our pockets, in our hands. And photography, which was once thought to be the most simple because it didn't require technique, or at least that's what people used to try to complain about, that anybody could take a photo. But when it comes to art, it is the visceral feeling that you see when you look at it. And it can be anything. It could be a canvas, it could be a video art. It could be anything. I remember going to Venice years ago, and I remember the Danish pavilion had Le Renaissanceur's work in vitro. I remember my wife and I, we walked in maybe midway. We ended up sitting for finishing it and watching it all over again from scratch. And I recall leaving there with such a vivid memory, like this artist wanted to send a message, and that message came out clear. I immediately called the gallery and I was like, is it an edition work? Is it? They're like, yeah, there are editions. I was like, how many sold? And this was at the end of the fair. They're like, none. I was like, if I'm not going to get the opportunity to see this work again, I'm buying it. So I bought the first edition. And then later on, I was happy to find out that the Tate Modern bought the second, the Jamil Foundation bought the third. If I'm not mistaken, I think also the Centre Pompidou bought the fourth. And I was like, I'm glad I was, and at the time, like I looked and I was like, you understand the energy and the commitment to create such a work. And anyone can watch it actually on Netflix. I still don't know what happened to the fifth. I'm guessing they're using it as a promotion. And to be fair, it's a great work. And it should be seen, and it should be looked at. And I think this is the important thing. It's not about what specific type of artwork that you're looking at. It's about, does the message come across? Does it change you? If it does, then great. And I think that one of the major things that we all forget is that if it changes your behavior, if it makes you look and change your mind about a situation, then it's a successful piece. It works. I remember that, actually, I'll probably end up going on and on. I'm sure we need to give these people a chance. This is turning into a solo talk. But no, I'm just going to wrap up with one thing. More than a decade ago, the Art Museum in Washington, D.C. had an exhibition of Time's 100 images that changed the world. I still remember going to that show, and there was an image from the Iraq War at the time of a young girl. And for whatever reason, while I was working at the UN, or actually working for the UAE mission, I was writing a speech and I couldn't get this image out of my head and I had to look for it. Couldn't find it. It wasn't a simple search, although I was like, how is it something so famous that you cannot easily Google it? But I found something better. A video on YouTube that Time created documenting how this image came up. It was taken by a gentleman by the name Chris Honduras. I think he died in Libya a few years after that, also documenting war. And I think it's important that like reporters and people who are there at the forefront get the opportunity, like are safe enough just to document what goes on. And not because I'm critiquing what I'm about to say. It is a very true thing. You know how you could be biased in a kind of way that you look at something that seems familiar and you're moved by it a bit more than something that you don't have historical imagery about. But when the guy was narrating, he goes that it influenced Western viewers specifically because it had all the symbolism that they started, that they associate with Christian imagery, tears of blood, things like this. I cannot tell you to be a certain kind of way. It is either you see something, you understand, and it clicks. It either clicks or it doesn't. But I always like to say that when it comes to war or death, it doesn't have to be pretty. What is this assumption that art needs to be, or death actually needs to be a certain kind of way? It is what it is. And it's not pretty, and it's not something that I think anybody should be aiming for. So I think images like anti-war imagery is very important. It reminds people, don't do it. Stay away from it. the trauma that's associated with it is huge. And people, their lives change because of it. And that's why you need to look at things like this more constantly.
Thank you very much, Your Highness. You have spoken very clearly to what we often call the aesthetic response, the fact that when we respond to works of art, we suspend our immediate judgment a little bit. Sometimes we don't, we're in fact horrified, but that too can be a response. As you say, that moves us in a way that's maybe different from the rational graph, the numbers of death tolls, whatever it is you may be reading about. One gets numbed by it. Somehow art seems to be, at least to you, I get a strong sense of this as you speak. It's so beautiful. An attentiveness holding machine. It grabs and holds you. And if you're a little lucky, you sit with it, you spend time with it, and you leave a little bit changed. Sometimes the change comes later. I think that's a very powerful set of indications. By the way, I know my Guggenheim Abu Dhabi team is here. I hope that fifth edition made its way into our collection. We're going to have to start looking for it, because clearly His Highness has a very good eye, and we want to follow that. Your Excellency Zaki, Nusseibeh.
Mariët, you know for a fact that anything you need from my side is available.
Thank you. Shukran jazeela. Your Excellency Zaki, you too are a major collector of art, particularly from the Gulf and from the broad Manasa region. You're a leader for us, you're a champion. You also have been a diplomat, just about all of your conscious adult life, ever since you came here to Abu Dhabi in 1967. You have been a very long-serving cultural advisor to successive presidents of the UAE, including the current president, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. And you have been a very specific diplomat, I would say, in a very significant moment in your career when you were Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 2017 to 21, I think it was. And you created specifically the thing that only you could have created, which is the Office of Public and Cultural Diplomacy. Cultural diplomacy, it was in your title. So we'd love to hear you speak. And on cue, here comes another major diplomat from the family, Her Excellency Lana Nusseibeh. So I would like to ask you if you could tell us something about the impetus to create that particular Office of Public and Cultural Diplomacy within the ministry, and tell us a little bit about its initiatives and how you really view this idea and practice of art as an agent of diplomacy.
Mariët. First of all, let me say that I do not consider myself a professional collector in the class of Dr. Farjam or Sheikh Zayed here, but an amateur collector. You know, Mariët, people started talking about cultural diplomacy and soft power only in the 90s. It came into political science terminology. But as you have explained yourself, and Farhad did as well, nations have been using cultural diplomacy from time immemorial. I mean, Alexander the Great conquered the whole world, as it was known then, not only with his troops, but also with the Hellenistic culture that we still enjoy today. The Islamic civilization at its height, an Islamic civilization that included all the different races and religions that lived within the huge geography that came under the hegemony of an Islamic civilization, also did it through the arts and through the language and through the literature. And I was interested to read only recently that in ranking countries, today we have an international ranking system for each country as to who is the first, the country that has most soft power. We had, of course, the United States as number one. We know that. They have been using their cultural diplomacy for more than 100 years now. United Kingdom, we follow their television programs and we know their films. But the third country was China. ahead of Germany and France. And China, we remember its cultural revolution under Mao Zedong, when the whole Chinese culture was decimated and destroyed. And yet, after it started its new life, if you like, they started conquering the world through their cultural diplomacy, which is, they sent an army, but it was an army of terracotta warriors that went around museums of the world to tell them about the new China. They opened up their institutes to teach Chinese, and they opened up even institutes for other languages to be inside China. We have a Zayed Arab Institute in Peking. So soft power, diplomacy, why do we use it? Because countries need to co-opt other countries to bring them closer to their viewpoints by using the resources that best serve that purpose, which I believe are not harsh power, only smart power, which is a mixture of different kinds of diplomacies, but cultural diplomacy. It's our values, our culture, and the message that our foreign policy wishes to convey. And in the United Arab Emirates, as you have said, I have been very fortunate from the very outset, because I worked with leaders who thoroughly believed in cultural diplomacy as the medium through which they wanted to address the whole world. I remember with Sheikh Zayed back in 1968, when I had a first interview with him, he said that his objectives, his goal, his vision for the future, of course, included opening cultural bridges to the rest of the world, bringing modernization into his country, but also to establish a network of relationships with nations around him, both regionally and internationally, and equally importantly, by opening up the gates of modernization to make sure that we maintain our culture, our heritage, and our traditions. And this was a message that was continued with Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed, and it's being carried through today also with His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. So the UAE, as a small or now a medium-sized country, used its soft power, its cultural diplomacy, in order to win friends, in order to share with them their values, in order to show its message that it wishes to carry out through in its international relationships. Now, in the UAE, of course, we have been using this cultural policy from the outset. I remember back in 1969 when we were traveling with Sheikh Zayed in Switzerland, and he found out that in the Geneva University there was an interest in Arab culture and language. A Professor Simon Jarji, as I remember, he asked us to bring, and I brought with me from Abu Dhabi, a cultural troupe to perform at the Geneva University with a message. And the message is to say that here in this part of the world, in the UAE, we're not a gas station, as some of the stereotyping of that epoch went. But we have our own traditions, our own culture, and we have our own message that we want to carry with us to the world. And this message continued for setting up an office in the foreign ministry, and I cannot speak about the foreign ministry in the presence of its experts around us here. But Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed asked me to set up an office because we know we live in a prosperous country ourselves, a stable country, a country that has brought so much onto the global scene. We have known today not for selling oil, but for having everything else around, an innovative technology and a booming cultural scene in the Emirates. But we nevertheless still live in a divided world. We are surrounded by tensions in this region and internationally. And therefore, the foreign minister felt that we need also to set up now, to officialize, if you like, what the UAE has been doing from the very beginning, how to bring this into a structure that could take it forward. And I was fortunate enough to start this process to begin to prioritize what can be done in supporting the Ministry of Foreign Affairs strategy and its goals. So diplomatic, cultural diplomacy does not work independently from a ministry's policies. It acts in order to support and to promote, and we did this by setting up a team, an office, by strategizing in accordance with MOFA strategies. Which countries do you need to prioritize? What kind of global message do you want to carry through? And then to work as a medium between our cultural institutions in the country and our embassies abroad. We are fortunate to have a number of embassies abroad, and each embassy needs a toolkit and to be told what kind of priorities we have for them to carry out, and to use our culture and our values in order to affect this. And our message, our moderate agenda, if you like, which has always been the same from the 60s, that the UAE is a country that wishes to work for the stability of the region, wishes to share not only in creating a prosperous environment for its 200 nationalities that live here in peace and that work together towards building a prosperous future, but also wishes to share in any way that it can in alleviating the suffering that Sheikh Zayed talked about around us, in bringing our humanitarian aid to play a part in bringing countries and nations together. And I am happy to say that today, as I look around me on this island, but also around me in the UAE, I'm happy to see that the UAE, from very early beginnings, Sheikh Zayed asked us to build this national museum in Al-Ain in 1971, before the basic infrastructures were in place for water and electricity in Al-Ain. And today we look around us and see what the UAE has achieved in terms of its museums, in terms of its culture, in terms of artificial intelligence. We are now the Economist said that we come as a third, ranked as third in power amongst the nations of the world. This is, I believe, the result of the UAE using its soft power in order to reinforce its message by showing what its culture and its values are all about.
Thank you very much for such a beautiful, coherent.
I have to ask now Lana as the expert, if that was okay.
Her Excellency Lana Nusseibeh approves, and we're all, of course, delighted to hear your, as always, so historically informed perspective and clear articulation of the strategy. My institution, the Guggenheim, in partnership with the Department of Culture and Tourism in the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, is a part of this history too, and I'm very delighted that we have with us here our colleague Manuel Rabaté, who since 2017 has directed a truly fascinating, and I would say in this context, highly successful product of cultural diplomacy in the Louvre, Abu Dhabi. The Louvre Abu Dhabi is a universal museum of art and culture, as you know, that is also the outcome of a partnership between France and Abu Dhabi at the very highest levels of governmental strategy and diplomacy, I would say. And so I think you are one of our star witnesses here to talk about, Manuel, how art and architecture work in a diplomatic sense. How do you think about that as the wonderful guiding steward of this institution?
Thank you, Mariët. Before answering to your question, I want to... Mic on? Maybe better? Adaptation? Thanks. Thank you, Zaki. Before answering, I will just take a minute to thank Dr. Farjam for gathering us, and also the Abu Dhabi Art Fair organizer for bringing these kind of talks. It's always complex. The world of culture is sometimes as divided as you can have met in the international geopolitics, the institutions, the museums, the collectors, the fairs. I think that what's happening here is also a gathering of energy and a sharing of vision. And that's why I'm extremely pleased to be here. And museum needs the fair, and museum needs to have the relationship with the collectors. What a treat, Farhad, you love an exhibition in the Musée d'Art Moderne de Paris, and you manage to invite it with your collection to recreate it partially. I love the first edition. Thank you for bringing it and sharing it here. It's very important. Second point, talking about witness in this field, when I'm sitting close to my friend and mentor on the topic, Zaki, who has His Excellency Zaki, who has been one of the fathers of Louvre Abu Dhabi, transforming the vision from the leadership into this museum is, I can accept my role of witness, but I think it comes from a deeper energy and so on. Sorry, Lana, Diala, that makes you sisters of the museum. I hope you accept the mission, if you allow me to start like that. No, but it's indeed highly diplomatical element that started this first universal museum of the Arab world. You mentioned 2017, which is the date of opening, but actually the discussion started more than a decade before. And this was during this incredible decision to transform this island into a hub of culture, education. New York University, that you know very well, is also part of this incredible integrated vision. And in this rich portfolio, the idea of a universal museum made sense on a diplomatic level. I think a universal museum, and the terminology is sometimes challenged, sometimes criticized, sometimes attack on the generosity it bears, on the incapacity to fulfill it. So deciding a universal museum is a bold diplomatic, a bold open arms to the world. It is a place where you say that you can invite all cultures of the world and present them and offer a narrative. The story of Universal Museum is actually quite long, and each of them is a representation at one point of a national point of view on the relationship to the world. I will talk for you hear my accent. Of course, I'm French. The Louvre in Paris is not the museum of the French people. It is a certain vision which is embodied in Paris, in France, on the relationship that the French people view with the world and the way they offer it to the world. And this is why it's very important. When the UAE are decided to put in the capital a new universal museum, it is a certain relationship of the UAE, not of France, of the UAE, on the way they see the relationship with the world. Of course, with the help of the French collection, expertise. But this is something which is definitely rooted here. And this is why, for me, it is serving this, this soft power, this diplomacy, this relation, because this is a way the UAE can envisage these 200 nationalities, this relationship, these elements. So we have done that in after 10 years of work, 7 years ago, because we're still a young museum, 5.5 million visitors since the opening, including COVID, which is not bad, but still a new model of Universal Museum. We decided in Abu Dhabi that it made sense not to try to be exhaustive, not to try to collect the totality of the richness of the world, which is the temptation that the aspiration, let's say, that the other museum, mainly in the Western world, are trying to have. We try to go also to the roots of the UAE, the Arab culture, the storytelling. So we thought what was important, and again it will connect with diplomacy, was to connect by shared stories the cultures of the world. So we, I hope it's not far if you just arrive for the fair, it's not very far. In the galleries you walk through times, and you walk through the galleries and you see artworks from all civilizations, all places, all religions that are talking to each other, that are in the same places, and we show, and indeed, Your Highness, you are right, not only for their beauty, but we show them for their significance, which is different from just being pleasant, and which is the meaning. And you see objects of the creation of mankind that are talking to each other. And this is, I think, a good way to create links. And for, if I had to close on this, the Universal Museum, within a way of gathering curiosity, science, discovery of the world, is a good projection on how you see from a place the rest of the world.
Thank you very much, Manuel. Yep. Beautiful statement on what I think is indeed a really powerful function of museums, the connecting of people, art and place, or it can be another kind of form of culture. It can even be natural history, which is also a cultural expression, of course. So, and you see all that here. And that brings us back, really here, I want to say, we're already almost at the end of our conversation, but I have a final thought prompted by all of that, what you've said, and then a question for each of you that you can answer in any order. So when you think about it, here we are on Saadiyat, and I want to bring us back to the art fair, because we are at Abu Dhabi Art. And I think we are so lucky that Abu Dhabi Art has for a long time, under the leadership of the Nusseibeh, thought about the fair as part of an art ecosystem, not its only thing. Of course, it has what every fair has to have to be successful, which is excellent galleries, top dealers from around the world, and especially the region, which is so much fun, who present contemporary art, but also modern art and historical forms of art. But along with that, look at all that's been built and made available to us here. We have a platform for emerging artists, beyond emerging artists. I really encourage you to go. There's a special section on masterpieces, as we call them, these stunning works of human creativity that have stood already the test of time. There are special presentations of ideas in these talks, and of course there are special collections on view in different ways. And just next door, over the wall, as Dr. Farhad said himself, we even have what really feels like a temporary museum, a work of utter museum quality, full of works of museum quality installed like a museum with wonderful interpretive material along with it. The exhibitions, Présence Arabe, Arab Presences in its English form, which is about artists from the Arab world who were working in Paris, another global capital, from 1908 to 1988. And you can probably find out why those dates if you go and study it. They're entirely drawn from Dr. Farjam's beautiful collection and curated highly expertly by Murat Montazami. So this is who was at the Tate before and so forth. This is really a world-class exponent of what this country is trying to do with its cultural strategy. And that brings us back to collectors and my question for each of you. There are no art fairs without collectors. There are no collectors without great art fairs. And so that is coming together here in a wonderful way. And thinking now beyond cultural diplomacy as something that states are engaged in or that need to change courses of history if we're a little bit lucky, I'm also very interested in how my own discipline of art history for many decades needed a really good little diplomatic shake-up, frankly. We'd gotten very satisfied reading our great big histories of art from Plato to NATO, and it really was from Plato to NATO with maybe the Taj Mahal thrown in, if you're lucky. Or maybe those Han statues that you mentioned from China. So I'm interested how you will think, as collectors and people who work with collectors, how do collectors have a chance to either reinforce existing canons or begin to shift them, move them, shape them in a way that makes the whole world better able to see all those others who we don't already know through their art. So it's really about what is our effect, what is the effect of collecting on the history of art itself. Who would like to start with this? I didn't want to put anyone on the spot, but I'm tempted to stick with Manuel for a second. Because he is presenting, of course, and reshaping a canon in a way in the very museum he directs.
This one, thanks. Thank you so much. Sharing it's like the collections. In our case, we collect collections by acquiring, so we have an active acquisition strategy, but we also developed a program that I coined ambassador object, with due respect to ambassadors when it is their job, your excellencies, because we realize that now the ownership of the artwork is something that is being discussed everywhere in the world with reasonable reasons. So a collector today who buys from an artist creates a relationship with the artist on the market, and this is what you can really do here. The historical collection exists. They have an history. This history needs to be known, published, and unquestioned, but this is history. So now when you build collection and you try to get artworks from all civilization and all period of time, as I said, it's extremely complex to do it. You can do it, and we have been doing it, but this is complex. So what we have built at Louvre Abu Dhabi is between the collection that we are building, between the access that we have to the French collection, is, if you can send back the slides, it's a series of specific relationships that have allowed to fuel and nurture these discussions on the artwork from all civilizations. So the first thing, if you go at the beginning, the first thing was to make sure that we have this story of the world which is told. The first thing was to make sure we would have the UAE. So, of course, this is the starting point, this is the anchor. So this is where we managed only on the 50th anniversary, because there was always 7 Emirates is hard to gather. So only on the 50th anniversary, we managed to have the full federation on the 7 Emirates always represented to the gallery. We also want to expand that to have the full GCC. The Saudi, Oman started with us. Bahrain just joined us. Beautiful masterpieces. We worked with Qatar, with Bahrain, but it was important to have the illustration of the region. We have this incredible loan from Jordan since the beginning, which was also, which is almost the starting point of the narrative. If you move a little bit after, voilà, UAE, Gulf, and this is the Jordan, beautiful, which is a statement on birth of representation, which is very strongly happening in the region.
And by the way, Laurent, don't forget, remember the year you had that exhibition about the Saudi archaeological,
yes.
And it was, if you think about it, it was monumental that the Saudis first showed this in the UAE before they ever showed it in Saudi Arabia. It was not a simple feat, and it also wasn't, if you ask me, when someone makes a move like that, then you know that you have a lot of love there. Like it takes...
Shukran. Thank you so much for mentioning it. That was... and we kept them, actually. Some of the rock art, unknown. Unknown.
That's exactly what I was about to ask you. I was about to jump in there.
Unknown. No, but it works so well. So if you go the last, so we made a statement connecting the site homely and the rock art coming from our Saudi friends, and it was so powerful ourselves. So it will move one day. It has to come back. It is not. We are the custodian of it, but it has to come back. But that's this kind of discussion also. So we expanded to the Philippines. We expanded to South Korea with Leum, and recently also to Mexico with this incredible Olmec head at the entrance, and many more. In January, we will have our first incredible exhibition on Africa, kings and queens of Africa, and we really hope it will shift the narrative and, as you were saying, Dr. Zaki, create connection and create friendship. And through the exhibitions, through the loans, through the partnership, really open the doors between the UAE and the countries of the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who would like to speak about what collectors can do for art history?
Yes, I mean, I'll try and respond to your question by saying, of course, we would never have had any great art without its patrons. We would not have had the Renaissance art without the Medicis, we would not have had the Sistine Chapel without Pope Sextus IV. We would not have had your own speciality, 17th century Dutch paintings without the patronage of the bourgeoisie families that came in. And of course, by having these patrons, they do influence and direct, if you like, the movement of art and its direction. But Mariët, I'm always a little worried when the question is phrased as, what can they do in order to impact or change? Because I believe that this is something that is organic. I believe that the important thing is to do what we are fortunate to have here, which is to have a mixture of both public investment, serious public investment. This was the commitment, the engagement of the government to build these global museums, but then to have the dynamic side of a community engagement. And this we have here because not only what is happening in Abu Dhabi itself feeds into that movement, but what is happening in Dubai, what is happening in Sharjah, what is happening around us now in Saudi Arabia. So I believe it's a dynamic process, but in answer to your question, patrons are absolutely essential for any art creativity, and therefore I encourage everybody who is here to become a patron, even though they can be amateur collectors and start by buying small, but it becomes after that an engagement, and it becomes a passion, and eventually we know it becomes an addiction with some collectors.
Thank you very much for that. And I really love the way, Zaki, that you described the organic character of the evolving shape of time that we see in the history of art that's collected and preserved. People preserve, people let go and throw away. And so what gets preserved is important, which is why museums are so important that do this, so that in the future we'll have this whole diversity of humanity on display. And I want to say something, since we are at the fair, about the market element here, because you mentioned the 17th century history of art in the Netherlands, my home native country. You just have to think about, you're good at the mind's eye, think about Rembrandt and Vermeer. Neither of them had state patrons to speak of. Maybe Rembrandt a little bit, but he was so contrarian that nobody really liked dealing with him. His great patrons were merchants, even bakers. It is the first modern art market where anybody could be an amateur collector or become a really obsessive one, as you mentioned. And there was enough private money around to do that. I agree, but I think this is where actually the combination with institutional vision, whether that's private vision of private founders of museums, we have them here too, or the state can make a significant difference, because while those collectors in the Netherlands might all keep collecting the same stuff, some of their leaders were collecting in Brazil. Some of their leaders were showing other parts of the world, for better or worse. And so the shape of art history is affected by collecting kind of unintentionally. And therefore, to make sure that we see the whole world in its cultures does take acts of intervention. And this is, I think, the power of the Saudi Art Cultural District, and how the Louvre and this country and your very Department of Cultural Diplomacy that you founded have thought about it. So lots of topics here. I want to give the last word to the poet who started this off, His Highness.
Thank you. Actually, it was interesting that you just mentioned Vermeer, because Vermeer, technically speaking, if I would tell you collect buy what you love. Don't forget, Vermeer was never famous during his lifetime. He was actually European, Western art collectors started becoming interested in him in the 19th century, 200, 300 years after he had gone. And this is the thing, is that some things that you might own or buy today, within the context of your taste, your collecting style, and the things, how people attach objects to people, the same way that you might like a certain element that your mom used to wear at some point, or something that you just want to keep. It's not because the significance is about the attachment. And I think that that's a very important part about when people collect. And I think one of the simplest ways of why you should buy, on the most simplistic level, and I see Noor, one of my favorite artists, is just to simply buy art. It's as simple as that. You want to support, just buy. Artists need to make a living. Nobody just creates on a whim. They need that kind of financial support to get through on a day-to-day kind of basis. And I think that when it comes to, and I think Mariët, you'd agree with me, the Met came into existence because of a handful of wealthy New York families. That was the basis of how this museum grew. Later on, people started donating, and they started acquiring as well, and this is how things happen. But I hate when people sometimes think that you need to do it in a kind of certain way. Life is for living. Just have fun. Buy what you love. Buy what moves you. Buy what changes the way that, the same way that when I bought In Vitro from the Danish pavilion. I did it because it touched me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Your Highness, for bringing it back around to what we love. You heard it here first, and certainly not last. Please buy art if you want to support the ecosystem. I want to thank His Highness, His Excellency, and my fellow director, Manuel. I want to thank especially Dr. Farjam for bringing us all together, as you always do. Thank you all for being with us and your patience, and let's go look at some art.